Hi there, my name is Erica Perez. I'm going to present my first ever professional development um, presentation on Black Lives Matter in schools. This is an assignment for the EDCI 6200 Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice course that I'm currently taking. And let's start. The Black Lives Matter movement. To kind of go over this first, let's start with why this matter, how this matter even came about. So basically, this movement started on social media, Twitter, and such social media as those. And it happened after a lot of high profile killings of young African American boys by police officers. Some of the ones that stand out are young boys like Trayvon Martin, who was killed by George Zimmerman, and Mike Brown, an 18-year-old, who was killed by a Ferguson police officer. So these are some of the more high-profile cases that are on the timeline that led to the actual Black Lives Matter movement. So moving along, though, the Black Lives Matter movement was started by three women, and two of those women are from the Black queer community. And so you'll see a lot of their rights are included in their guiding principles and on the agenda as well. So the Black Lives Matter 13 guiding principles, it looks like this. This is just the black and white copy of it, but on the right now, I'm just going to kind of take you through my presentation, but I will also provide you the Google slide link to it so that you can go back and look at any of it that you find interesting or important or you'd like to discover more about. So the guiding principles, one of the things that I think is important to consider when looking at these guiding principles, and it comes from our Sensory and D'Angelo course book that we're reading, is everyone really equal? And these were one of the things I had to check myself on also, because when talking about Black Lives Matter, I totally agree with that. That's not hard for me to understand. But one of the areas that was a little harder for me to understand is like the transgender affirming and the queer affirming. Some of those things go against my religious beliefs, but I think it is important to make yourself aware of these things as teachers and educators. We need to know how to handle these situations and be able to relate to our students who may fall into these categories. So one of the quotes that I got from this book by Sensory and D'Angelo was, focus on understanding rather than agreeing with the material. So a lot of the material I agree with and I understand, but some of it was, I don't agree with it, but at least I can understand where they're coming from. So first of all, let's go over the 13 guiding principles of the Black Lives Matter, starting with diversity, restorative justice, globalism, queer affirming, unapologetically Black, collective value, empathy, loving engagement, transgender affirming, Black lives, Black women, Black families, and intergenerational. So these are the areas that the Black Lives Matter movement is highlighting and incorporating in the lessons that they're putting out there. So moving along, though, again, this presentation is not really to focus on Black Lives Matter, but more specifically how Black Lives Matter in schools. So my next slide is the Week of Action National Demands, and this was put out for the Black Lives Matter at School. They have their little flyer that floated around all social media, and that was basically their face for this week, where they were going to create a space for students of color, specifically African American students, and give them the opportunity to be recognized and highlight their heritage. So these are the national demands that the Black Lives Matter at School was aiming to hit, and these are the demands that they want to see made for the advancement of their people. So the first one is to end zero tolerance. So basically this is on there because it is a well-known fact, and when you look at data, it's clearly there that African American students are suspended and expelled at a higher rate than other nationalities. Latino and African Americans are suspended at higher rates, to be specific. But this movement, or to recognize Black Lives Matter at School, is specifically talking about Black lives. So they want to end the zero tolerance, and instead they want to replace this with restorative justice and finding new ways that we can work together to combat the school to prison pipeline. And again, this is an area, we'll go over some data that gives you actual percentages of how many, at what rate our African American students are being suspended. One of the things that I do think has helped probably in this area is the initiative of PBIS, teaching our students ways to handle situations rather than outlashing or, giving them coping mechanisms, how to handle problems or things that might arise. So I do think that PBIS currently, when implemented correctly, is helping in this area. The next national demand for Black Lives Matter in schools is the mandate for Black history and ethnic studies. And again, this came about because our African American students, they want to hear about their contributions, but not only the contributions, but they want to hear the struggle that their people endured. And they feel like those areas are just simply ignored. So they want to have access to Black history and ethnic studies. And I think that this is a great demand, because I know as an individual and as a teacher, and even when I reflect on my own upbringing and personal experience in school, I'm part Caucasian, part Hispanic, and I only saw history from one point of view. And it wasn't until college that I got to take a Chicano studies class and learn about my heritage. So I do think that this is important. It gets kids excited to learn, and it teaches them about their own heritage. So I do agree with the mandate for Black history and ethnic studies in schools is a great requirement and a good demand for this movement. The next one is to hire more Black teachers. And again, in the upcoming professional development, we'll look at some actual statistics of what nationality teachers are in the classroom in today's society. So we'll see that there definitely is a need for this. So hire more Black teachers, mandate the Black history and ethnic studies, end the zero tolerance to combat the school to prison pipeline. And then the last one is to fund counselors, not cops. And basically, this comes about because data suggests that there's 1.6 million children in the United States today that go to school where there is one police officer but no counselors. So again, this is just, I think this is I don't know which teacher would disagree with this. This is a great mandate or demand, because, we do need to use our resources to nurture our youth rather than criminalize them or stereotype them. So this is a great demand. Again, these 4 demands, national demands, put on by the Black Lives Matter in Schools movement is pushing in the right direction, I feel. All right, so moving on, the Black Lives Matter at School, this started at a small Seattle school, and it then grew exponentially. Other states and other cities now recognize the Black Lives Matter at school. They dedicate one entire week during the school year to highlight, and they plan activities and different team building opportunities to create space for our Black Lives Matter at school movement and for the Black African American student population. Let's see what else. So moving along. The next thing that I want to talk about is, why is this topic even relevant? So when we look at our minority groups, as pointed out by Nieta and Bode, which is our course textbook, Affirming Diversity, Nieta and Bode point out that the nation's Hispanic population constitutes 17.6% of the nation's total population, coming in at 56.6 million who are from the Hispanic population. This makes the Hispanics both the largest and the fastest growing minority group in today's society. Coming in second, so right behind our Hispanic population, Nieto and Bode further point out that the next largest minority group is our Black or our African Americans, and there are approximately 46.3 million African Americans in today's society. So minority groups are growing. As teachers, we need to know how to relate to them. We need to understand their background, their culture, and so that we can better meet their needs in the classroom. Continuing, another reason why this is even relevant in today's society is something called systemic racism. So I'm going to show you just a small clips that I found on YouTube that kind of goes over what exactly this is. I'm not going to show you the entire video. If you want to learn more about it, it is on the Google slide and you can watch the video in its entirety, but I'm just going to show you a small video clip of it.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandmother.
All right, so that was systemic racism, and you can watch, again, the video. It's about 4.5 minutes long, but some of the things that just kind of jump out to me is the idea of the disparity between taxpayer dollars that are going to probably low socioeconomic neighborhoods versus neighborhoods of middle class or higher society. So there's a huge discrepancy in that, and that's something that this idea that's putting our most vulnerable students at a disadvantage. All right, so let's go. Did that. Moving along. So it's basically these ideas of systemic racism that is why Black Lives Matter movement in schools is even relevant today. There definitely is racism, and if we look at the data, there's a lot of discrepancies for our African American and Latino and other minority group students that are put at a disadvantage. Let's look at trends and disciplinary policies. Again, when we look back at the Black Lives Matter in school, their very first national demand was the first one that I went over. And this is, that's again from this right here. Their very first one was in zero tolerance right here. And when we look at the data, Nieto and Bode, which is again this textbook right here in Affirming Diversity, they suggest that students living in poverty and students of color are more likely to be suspended and expelled. So again, other than the obvious, why should we care about that? Well, when we look further at that and the trends, and just as educators, we know what happens to students that are being suspended at a higher rate and that are expelled. Their future doesn't look too bright. So it really is, I think, a great demand that the Black Lives Matter at School are pushing for. It needs to be addressed, and we need to find some better solutions to this, come together to provide some solutions. So Nieto and Bode continue on this, and they say, and they highlight that students who receive suspensions are more likely to drop out of high school. So we have to get these students when they're younger, and we need to come up with a better plan rather than suspending and expelling students. We need to teach them some strategies. And again, that's kind of where PBIS comes in, but we need to teach them how to handle situations that might arise at school. So when we look at this data right here, it's this image right here. I know it's kind of hard to see right here, but this will be on my Google slide. This image right here, I'm going to just show you real quick, and then I'm going to talk about it. So this is the Department of Education suspension data for girls and boys. And this came from the 2011-2012 school year. And when we compare white boys to black boys were suspended at 3 times black boys were more likely to be suspended by 3 times the rate as white boys. So again, this is unacceptable. And then when we look at the rate that white girls versus black girls are suspended, black girls are suspended, are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. So we see this huge discrepancy. Again, here we go. Here's our boys. The African American students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than the white male student. And when we look at the white female student versus the African American female student, African American girls are suspended at a rate that's 6 times more likely than the white female students. So this is definitely an area of concern. And I know even in our own county, the Kern County High School District was going through a lawsuit back in 2016, and they settled and had to pay the families a amount of money for this, because when they looked at the rate that our Latino and African Americans were being suspended, it was a higher rate than their white counterparts. So it's definitely, and it's not just a problem here in Kern County, it's all over the world. When you look at the data, the African American and Latino students are being suspended at a higher rate. So this is a great demand, I think, from the Black Lives Matter at School movement. All right, let's continue to move. I think we go next to the diversity among the nation's teachers. Okay, so when we look at what the diversity is for our teachers in the United States, it's not very diverse at all. Let's see, when we look at Nieto and Boyd point out that diversity among the nation's teachers has not kept its pace. Nieto and Boyd also suggest that in 2014, only 82% of the public school teachers were white, which is 18% being people of color. And again, this is creating a problem, because if we see this trend that minority groups such as Latinos coming in at number 1, the fastest and largest minority group, and African Americans falling just a little short behind our Hispanic population. If we see that we have a higher rate of these minority groups, then it should also be reflected in the workforce of our teachers. And as this data suggests, only 18% are minority teachers. So I know, reflecting on my own background, I didn't have a teacher of color all through kinder through 8th grade. It wasn't until I was in high school that I had my first African American teacher. And, when I think back to my own upbringing, I would have liked to have had a Hispanic or African American teacher in elementary or even junior high. So I think that idea probably pops in many students' mind if most of the teachers are Caucasian, that they also wish to have a teacher that is similar to them in color and nationality and all of those things. All right, I'm going to show you just a really quick clip of this video, and it's on the lack of
For the first time
diversity.
in 4 years, the federal government released...
Oops. Darn it. Here we go.
For the first time in 4 years, the federal government released data on the American teaching force. Here's some of what we learned. There are about 3.8 million public school teachers in the U.S. That's around 400,000 more than the last time the Education Department measured. The average U.S. teacher is white, female, and has about 14 years of experience. She's 42 years old, and she earns about $55,000 a year. On an average week, she puts in about 53 hours of school-related work. Looking nationally, the teaching force has a long way to go in terms of diversity. 80% of teachers are white, 9% are Hispanic, 7% are Black, and 2% are Asian. These teachers are working with a student population that looks really different from themselves. These days, white students are actually in the minority. There are more Black, Asian, and Hispanic students than white students in public schools. There are some...
All right, so I'm going to stop right there. Again, this will be in the Google slide. If you're interested in watching the video in its entirety, you can see that there in my Google slide presentation. All right, so moving along, I've also provided some resources for educators on the Black Lives Matter. There are lots of resources for all age groups, from kinder through high school. So those links will be in the Google slide. There's also a template that if you're anything like me, just kind of researching this and planning this professional development has really pushed me to want to incorporate this in our Black History Month that we have at our school. So there's even a template that if you want to inform your families, if your school is thinking about covering this topic and designating that week-long focus on Black Lives Mattering at school, there's a template that you can use and edit it with your school's information to inform your families on what will happen and partake that week. So there are some good things there. That's under the resource for educators. It kind of looks like this. There's different hyperlinks that I provided for you. A couple other things I want to go over before I end are here's one. This would be more for like junior high and high school, but this is Jesse Williams, who is a biracial actor from today's society, and he's giving a speech that's pretty provoking at his BET Awards. So you'll see his link right there, and this video can be shown to your students. And you can do like a circle meeting or discussion, however you want to have that. But there's different rounds and questions and prompts that you can prompt your students to answer. So the first one, I'll go over a couple of them. The first round, you can talk about what was your gut reaction to Jesse Williams' speech. The next question says, what do you think Williams meant when he said freedom is always conditional here? Round 3, you can discuss, Williams said, if you have a critique for our resistance, then you better have an established record of critique of our oppression. What do you think that quote means? How might it be connected to the Black Lives Matter and the media coverage of Black Lives Movement? What imagery that Williams used stood out to you? After reading and hearing his speech, what might you want to say to Williams? Are you inspired at any take in any particular action? And give one word to capture your feelings about Jesse Williams' speech. So again, that will be there in the Google slide presentation. And this would be appropriate for like junior high to high school, I would say. You might, if you're looking for ways to provide a more multicultural topic, or you want to incorporate the Black Lives Matter in schools in your classroom, this is something that you guys can hold a discussion on. Again, that one would be for junior high. Let's see. There was another one called, this would be more appropriate for like kinder through second grade, I would say. This book is called Milo's Museum. This is the book that you could purchase and read and talk about with your students. But it's basically an African American student. He goes on a field trip, and he notices on this field trip that he never sees his own any artifacts from his own culture in the museum. So he then creates his own museum at his house, and he presents it. And there's the museum is all about his own culture. So again, you could ask your students to make a list of things that tell a story about who they are. What objects reveal their strength? Have you ever won a trophy or a prize? Is there something you loved when you were younger but have since outgrown? What are your prized possessions, and what art have you created? And again, this is just a simple way to incorporate learning about other students' lives and differences in our cultures, and giving students a space to present that to their classmates. In closing, I did have a book that I wanted to bring up as a suggested teacher reading, and it just so happens that the author is Robin DiAngelo, who is also the co-author of our course textbook, one of our course textbooks. So her book is called White Fragility, and it says why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. So this is a great book, and it will provoke you to examine your own bias that you may unknowingly have. And it's a book that's getting a lot of buzz right now. So this is what it looks like right here, White Fragility. And if you're interested in learning more about this, that would be a great place to start. Again, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on Black Lives Matter in schools. And I hope that you learned a little something more than what you already knew. And again, I think this is a relevant topic in our schools. As an educator, it's provoked me to want to learn more and read more, and to incorporate more opportunities for my students to share their own backgrounds and provide them with multicultural experiences in the classroom. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.